Hello and welcome back here. I'm Olajola, a singer, songwriter, still, and many other things as the need arises. I'm presently on my third pageant commentary video, maybe because I love them so much. And if you watched my first video in this series, you probably already know why. First, I must wish you a happy new year. I'm proud of me, proud of you, proud of all we're able to achieve and not achieve. And I really hope that we have more ticks and more positive things on our to-do list for the year 2026. For my last two videos, I gave a kind of wrap of delegates who represented my country, the giant of Africa, Nigeria, on the international stage for 2025. And in those videos, there were two delegates who were still competing at the time I recorded them. However, the results are in and have been in for a couple of weeks, and it's not good in my opinion, bringing back to mind the conversation about whether Africans are intentionally being excluded by some of these international pageants from advancing or even winning the competition altogether. Now, hear me, I don't have an issue with people not placing or advancing. It didn't deliver a healthily memorable top tier level performance, but it appears like this might not be enough for African delegates. I will get into my thoughts about that much later in the video, but first let's talk about these two delegates who I was convinced of the absolute best with respect to their performance and their success at their competitions. A disclaimer, the first part of this video will be heavy on my opinions about the two Nigerian delegates who competed in December 2025. The majority of what is said in this video as a whole are my opinions, sprinkled with some popular opinions in the pageant community. So let's get it. First, Awolesi David, Mr. Friendship Nigeria 2025. As I said in my last video, I first took notice of him at the MON 2025 competition where he was very promising and gave such a stunning performance. However, he failed to clinch a crown at that competition and went on to do just that at the Mr. Elite 2025 competition. The final days leading into the international competition, we saw him put effort into getting all the help he needed to make it down to Thailand in time, and as soon as he landed, he already started to shine, making it to the top 3 of the Voice of Friendship Speaking Challenge and doing so well at the welcome kind of swimsuit and evening wear fashion show. Imagine my shock when he didn't make the cut, like at all. I was like, are you people joking? What do you mean? Because his performance skills have never been in question in my opinion. He put in the work to building his body, showed up healthily with respect to styling as well, and he can clearly speak. I mean, top 3 Voice of Friendship. So where did you people keep his placement or crown? I think there was hardly anything more he could have done. Probably was just the case of the organization not checking for him for a crown, and that maybe made sense, but like at least a placement to reward his hard work. And this is not me saying any of the other guys who got placement did not deserve it. Sorry to them, but our guy deserved the placement as well. I watched clips of his performances again and again in all segments, and I think he put everything on the table. So it's hard to not wonder whether something is at play. Next, Adekola Tofunmi Gloria, Miss Cosmo Nigeria 2025. Where do I start? I think where entries for the national competition opened, because I came across her entry was the only one out at that time, and I was like, who is this eloquent queen? And luckily and deservedly so, she went on to win the national competition. You know, there was not much data on the internet to show us what we'd signed up for, as she hadn't been in any international franchise competitions of recent. I think it was not until the official intro video started to roll out and when she arrived in Vietnam that it was clear that we were in for an amazing ride. I felt the proudest and the calmest about Tofunmi's journey as a delegate represented the country because she delivered on all fronts, and it was clear that the effort was being appreciated and recognized by pageant fans and bloggers all over the world. So imagine my massive and huge shock when they called out the entire top 21 and she was nowhere to be found. Again, I was like, as how? What do you mean? What's going on? Because people were literally already predicting her win, and rightly so in my opinion. So for her not to place at all, wow. Well, I think the likeliest reason as to why that was the case was because the organization wasn't checking for her as a potential representative for their new era. And while I even say that, it just brings to mind how and why I think competitions about art and beauty are not for the faint of heart at all. Because I guarantee you, you can do the best you can, be the best quality material representing your country on the international stage, and all your effort will pale next to the bias that the subjective nature of the judging process allows. Pageants, singing competitions, reality TV shows, etc. Well, sometimes it happens to be that the winner is better at everybody else at more things. However, there's still enough bias to go around to the point that in some cases they just need to be better at everybody at one thing, which is being exactly what the organization is looking for. Now, to my title question, are pageants intentionally preventing African delegates from advancing or winning? A very valid question, in my opinion, considering how the international pageant scene has moved around African delegates all through 2025. The ones that rise to the top of the drama dome: one, MU and Olivia Yacés, plus at least three other snobs of otherwise deserving African candidates. Miss Cham's brazen exclusion of the African continent at all in their placements, followed closely by Miss Cosmo placing only one African delegate, Miss Grand and Faith Maria Porter. And while I appreciate these delegates for their sportsmanship, for the most part, in handling this intentional or unintentional injustice, I don't think it should be swept under the carpet. I think something is definitely amiss. To answer my question, I don't think it's an intentional exclusion, more like I hope there isn't one. What I'm saying is, I think it would be incredulously sacrilegious for a pageant organization to instruct their judges to deliberately score delegates from a particular region lower, or exclude them, or review placement lists before announcing to swap names out. That would be grounds for serious lawsuits, and I'd like to think their legal team would advise them against doing such and that they'd listen. However, I think there are some other things that might have been done or not done that might introduce some level of bias against African delegates. I made a short list: organizational plan and strategy, grading systems and structures, performance and fan voting, diversity, equality, and inclusion in the judging panel. As we well know, and has become increasingly obvious in recent times, pageant organizations are organizations in the real sense of it. They have business, missions, visions, values, goals, targets, target audiences, etc. They have C-level executives, employees in different departments, like you would expect in a real actual organization. Therefore, I wouldn't be shocked if their marketing and communications teams prepare some kind of pitch decks to explain the path or direction that the organization is looking to go in their next era. And I wouldn't also be shocked if some version of that deck is presented to expert judges being employed by the organization to judge contestants and help them pick their next queen. And this is not particularly shocking or a bad thing, in my opinion, because just as I said in my last video, I feel like pageants are a kind of interview for a role. Yes, there's more glam and fun events for everyone, but ultimately, the delegates are in a competition to sell themselves as the best representative for the organization going into the new era. So when the organization briefs the judges based on the criteria they're considering, that obviously already introduces some level of bias for countries whose delegates don't meet the requirements based on the experience or the knowledge level of the judges. For example, in such a briefing session, if we're hearing things like the delegates needs to be able to create, optimize, and harness large-scale international networks, be someone who can travel to different countries, be universally acceptable in multiple countries all over the world, or be from a country with a vibrant pageant community, you already kind of have an idea of certain countries or delegates from certain regions that this kind of description excludes. I mean, we recently had to endure the torture of an entire CEO of a massive pageant organization talking about somebody's passport as the reason why they couldn't win. So I strongly believe that this is such a powerful source of the bias that prevents our African delegates from winning the crown, and I think it's strong enough to place a bar on the number of placements our region secures in comparison to other regions. And this brings me to my next point: grading systems and structures. I have never been a judge at any pageant before in my life, so I'm not going to pretend like I know what systems are being operated or what a perfect grading or scoring system looks like. However, we've seen sample data sheets where we can tell that these judges assign the delegates a grade over 10, and the total grades are then aggregated or averaged and a rank determined. Also, we've seen some sheets where it's clear that the scored segments are broken down into parameters that are scored for each candidate, aggregated, summed up together, aggregated, averaged, and then a rank also determined. Also, I recently heard a pageant blogger who has been a pageant queen and a pageant judge before assign scores to delegates as if she were a judge, just creating or simulating a pretend scene like she were a judge. And that was the same thing. She was assigning grades over 10 to each of the delegates. Putting all this together, I think we have a rough idea of what the scoring process looks like. If you pair my last point together and the fact that these judges simply observe the delegates during the scored sessions or scored events and assign a grade, hopefully based on performance, the room for prejudice expands, especially if they are only just observing them and giving a grade on the whole performance as against judging specific parameters. And I think the more parameters there are to be judged, the more fair, hopefully, these scoring processes can be. Even if the grading process casts the judges on such a level, I believe that they would still always likely score delegates who they don't think are a match for what the organization is looking for a lower grade. And where prototyping is king, I think the best thing you can do for yourself is to align as close as possible what the organization is looking for, because the best pasarela, the best evening gown, even the best glam will not save you in such a situation. Performance and fan voting. As I have said before, when delegates perform exceptionally well, they should reasonably be able to expect to place or have a fighting chance at the crown. When people would complain in 2024 about some delegates being excluded or ignored, I wouldn't be shocked or disappointed. But coming in 2025 and watching delegates put in the work to transform and deliver impeccably well on the international stage and still be ignored, especially in the women departments, while we saw it at Miss Universe and at Miss International, always being only so close to the crown but never able to reach it despite putting up such a top tier delivery amongst the top five. The fan vote thing is another mountain that these queens have to scale. Queens from countries with vibrant pageant communities usually have it easy in this. However, those from other regions have to resort to bulk vote buying with sponsored funds, and it becomes a bidding game where everybody's trying to top the last person's high or for a placement. Most African countries do not have an endless supply of pageant fans to push their candidates up the ranks. And even if they did, the buying power might not be there. Hence, African delegates rarely win the fan book category or the placement reward that it offers. Next, diversity, equality, and inclusion on the judging panels. I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory. We've all seen the list time and over with minimal to no African representation on the judging panel, and regions like Asia and the Americas having more healthy representation. And then it's not shocking when the placements lists come out and Latin countries or Latin American countries and Asian countries have a lot more representation than the African countries. It makes sense because these judges almost always have their own biases as to what qualifies as beauty and a solid performance, and these standards may not cater to or include African delegates. Bias is inherently human, and I think unless these organizations factor that into their entire process and are really keen on making their competitions actual equal opportunity contests, they wouldn't be motivated towards creating structures or putting checks and balances in place to reduce this bias as much as possible and give every delegate an equal opportunity to win or place or do just ultimately just really well at the competitions. And I have seen this self-hating, self-loathing, self-sabotaging comments from certain African pageant delegates or bloggers about how is evening wear work or swimwear performance wasn't good enough. And I can't help but ask, by whose standards? First off, did said person walk from point A to B in a pasarela-esque way that's clearly different from how they would walk on the street or maybe on a beach day? Yes. Did they pose at the start of the ramp and at the end of the ramp? Yes. Did they perform and nail turns? Yes. Did they try to interact and look, at the judges, at the camera, at the audience? Did their faces move? Yes. So I'm like, what else would you expect somebody to deliver in a good enough evening wear or swimwear performance? Like, is it because the work is not Latina enough or the glam is not Asian enough? Well, that sums up my thoughts on the entire thing. I don't think Africans should pull out 100% of these global competitions and start our own thing. I mean, we can also do that on the side, but nothing says we're not going to have similar bias problems in an African structure. I think the global pageant community needs to hold these organizations accountable with respect to demanding a transparent and fair competition as well as a good show. Thank you for listening to me yap again. Do share your thoughts in the comment section, leave a like, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you.